Now that I have made this catalogue of swindles and perversions, let me give another example of the kind of writing that they lead to. This time, it must be of its nature, be unimaginable. I am going to translate a passage of good English into modern English, of the worst sort. Here is a well-known verse from Ecclesiastes. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favour to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth. Here it is in modern English. Objective consideration of contemporary phenomena compels the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. This is a parody, but not a very gross one. Exhibit 3 above, for instance, contains several patches of the same kind of English. It will be seen that I have not made a full translation. The beginning and ending of the sentence follow the original meaning fairly closely, but in the middle, the concrete illustrations, race, battle, bread, dissolve into the vague expressions, success or failure in competitive activities. This had to be so, because no modern writer of the kind I am discussing, no one capable of using phrases like objective consideration of contemporary phenomena, would ever tabulate his thoughts in that precise and detailed a manner. The whole tendency of modern prose is away from concreteness. Now analyze these two sentences a little more closely. The first contains 49 words, but only 60 syllables, and all of its words are those of everyday life. The second contains 38 words of 90 syllables. 18 of its words are from Latin roots, and 1 from Greek. The first sentence contains 6 vivid images and only 1 phrase, time and chance. That could be called vague. The second contains not a single fresh, arresting phrase, and in spite of its 90 syllables, it gives only a shortened version of the meaning contained in the first. Yet, without a doubt, it is the second kind of sentence that is gaining ground in modern English. I do not want to exaggerate. This kind of writing is not yet universal, and outcrops of simplicity will occur here and there in the worst written page. Still, if you or I were told to write a few lines on the uncertainty of human fortunes, we should probably come much nearer to my imaginary sentence than to the one from Ecclesiastes. As I have tried to show, modern writing, at its worst, does not consist in picking out words for the sake of their meanings and inventing images in order to make the meaning clearer. It consists in gumming together long strips of words which have already been set in order by someone else and making the results presentable by sheer humbug. The attraction of this way of writing is that it is easy. It is easier, even quicker, once you have the habit, to say, in my opinion, it is not an unjustifiable assumption that, than to say, I think. If you use ready-made phrases, you not only don't have to hunt about for words, you also don't have to bother with the rhythms of your own sentences, since these phrases are generally so arranged as to be more or less euphonious. When you are composing in a hurry, when you are dictating to a stenographer, for instance, or making a public speech, it is natural to fall into a pretentious, Latinized style. Tags like a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, or a conclusion to which all of us would readily assent, will save many a sentence from coming down with a bump. By using stale metaphors, similes, and idioms, you save much mental effort at the cost of leaving your meaning vague, not only for your reader, but for yourself. This is the significance of mixed metaphors. The sole aim of a metaphor is to call up a visual image. When these images clash, as in the fascist octopus has sung its Swan Lake, the jackboot is thrown into the melting pot. It can be taken as certain that the writer is not seeing a mental image of the objects he is naming. In other words, he is not really thinking. Look again at the examples I give in the beginning of this essay. Professor Lasky, the first example, uses 5 negatives in 53 words. One of these is superfluous, making nonsense of the whole passage, and in addition, there is the slip alien for akin, making further nonsense, and several avoidable pieces of clumsiness, which increase the general vagueness. Professor Hogben, the second example, plays ducks and drakes with a battery which is able to write prescriptions. While disapproving of the everyday phrase put up with, is unwilling to look egregious up in the dictionary and see what it actually means. Example number 3. If one takes an uncharitable attitude towards it, it is simply meaningless. Probably one could work out its intended meaning by reading the whole of the article in which it occurs. In example 4, the writer knows more or less what he wants to say, but an accumulation of stale phrases chokes him like tea leaves blocking a sink. And in example 5, words and meanings have almost parted company entirely. People who write in this manner usually have a general emotional meaning. They dislike one thing and want to express solidarity with another thing, but they are not interested in the detail of what they are saying. A scrupulous writer, in every sentence that he writes, will ask himself at least 4 questions, and they are, thus, what am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clearer? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect? And will he ask himself 2 more? Could I put it more shortly? Have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? But you are not obliged to go to all this trouble. You can shirk it by simply throwing your mind open and letting the ready-made phrases come crowding in. They will construct your sentences for you, even think your thoughts for you, to a certain extent, and at need they will perform the important service of partially concealing your meaning, even from yourself. It is at this point that the special connection between politics and the debasement of language becomes clear. In our time, it is broadly true that political writing is bad writing. Where it is not true, it will generally be found that the writer is some kind of rebel, expressing his private opinions and not a party line. Orthodoxy of whatever colour seems to demand a lifeless, imitative style. Political dialects to be found in pamphlets, leading articles, manifestos, white papers, and the speeches of undersecretaries do, of course, vary from party to party, but they are all alike in that one almost never finds in them a fresh, vivid, homemade turn of speech. When one watches some tired hack on the platform mechanically repeating the familiar phrases, bestial atrocities, iron heel, blood-stained tyranny, free peoples of the world, stand shoulder to shoulder, one often has a curious feeling that one is not watching a live human being, but some kind of dummy, a feeling which suddenly becomes stronger at moments when the light catches the speaker's spectacles and turns them into blank discs, which seem to have no eyes behind them. And this is not altogether fanciful. A speaker who uses that kind of phraseology has gone some distance towards turning himself into a machine. The appropriate noises are coming out of his larynx, but his brain is not involved as it would be if he were choosing his words for himself. If the speech he is making is one that he is accustomed to make over and over again, he may be almost unconscious of what he is saying, as one is when one utters the responses in church. And this reduced state of consciousness, if not indispensable, is at any rate favourable to political conformity. In our time, political speeches and writing are largely the defence of the indefensible. Things like the continuance of British rule in India, the Russian purges and deportations, the dropping of the atom bombs on Japan, can indeed be defended, but only by arguments which are too brutal for most people to face, and which do not square with the professed aims of political party. Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question-begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. Defenceless villages are bombarded from the air, the inhabitants driven out into the countryside, the cattle machine-gunned, the huts set on fire with incendiary bullets. This is called pacification. Millions of peasants are robbed of their farms and sent trudging along the roads with no more than they can carry. This is called transfer of population, or rectification of frontiers. People are imprisoned for years without trial, or shot in the back of the neck, or sent to die of scurvy in Arctic labour camps. This is called elimination of unreliable elements. Such phraseology is needed if one wants to name things without calling up mental pictures of them. Consider, for instance, some comfortable English professor defending Russian totalitarianism. He cannot say outright, "I believe in killing off your opponents," when you can get good results by doing so. Probably, therefore, he will say something like this. While freely conceding that the Soviet regime exhibits certain features which the humanitarian may be inclined to deplore, we must, I think, agree that a certain curtailment of the right to political opposition is an unavoidable concomitant of transitional periods, and that the rigours which the Russian people have been called upon to undergo have been amply justified in the sphere of concrete achievement. The inflated style itself is a kind of euphemism. A mass of Latin words falls upon the facts like soft snow, blurring the outlines and covering up all the details. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were instinctively, to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish squirting out ink. In our age, there is no such thing as keeping out of politics. All issues are political issues, and politics itself is a mass of lies, evasions, folly, and hatred, and schizophrenia. When the general atmosphere is bad, language must suffer. I should expect to find, this is a guess which I have not sufficient knowledge to verify, that the German, Russian, and Italian languages have all deteriorated in the last 10 or 15 years as a result of dictatorship. But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation, even among people who should and do know better. The debased language that I have been discussing is in some ways very convenient. Phrases like a not unavoidable assumption, leaves much to be desired, would serve no good purpose, a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, are a continuous temptation. A packet of aspirins always at one's elbow. Look back through this essay, and for certain you will find that I have again and again committed the very faults I am protesting against. By this morning's post, I have received a pamphlet dealing with conditions in Germany. The author tells me that he felt imperiled to write it. I open it at random, and here is almost the first sentence that I see. The Allies have an opportunity not only of achieving a radical transformation of Germany's social and political structure in such a way as to avoid a nationalistic reaction in Germany itself, but at the same time of laying the foundations of a cooperative and unified Europe. You see, he feels impelled to write. Feels, presumably, that he has something new to say. And yet his words, like cavalry horses answering the bugle, group themselves automatically into the familiar, dreary pattern. This invasion of one's mind by ready-made phrases, lay the foundations, achieve a radical transformation, can only be prevented if one is constantly on guard against them, and every such phrase anesthetizes a proportion of one's brain. I said earlier that the decadence of our language is probably curable. Those who deny this would argue, if they produce an argument at all, that language merely reflects existing social conditions, and that we cannot influence its development by any direct tinkering with words and constructions. So far as the general tone or spirit of a language goes, this may be true, but it is not true in detail. Silly words and expressions have often disappeared, not through any evolutionary process, but owing to the conscious action of a minority. Two recent examples were explore every avenue and leave no stone unturned, which were killed by the jeers of a few journalists. There is a long list of fly-brown metaphors which could similarly be got rid of if enough people would interest themselves in the job. And it should also be possible to laugh the not-un formation out of existence, to reduce the amount of Latin and Greek in the average sentence, to drive out foreign phrases and straight scientific words, and, in general, to make pretentiousness unfashionable. But all these are minor points. The defence of the English language implies more than this, and perhaps it is best to start by saying what it does not imply. As a note, one can cure oneself of the not-un formation by memorizing this sentence. A not unblack dog was chasing a not unsmall rabbit across a not ungreen field. To begin with, it was nothing to do with archaism, with the salvaging of obsolete words and turns of speech, or with the setting up of a standard English, which must never be departed from. On the contrary, it is especially concerned with the scrapping of every word or idiom which has outworn its usefulness. It has nothing to do with correct grammar and syntax, which are of no importance, as so long as one makes one's meaning clear, or with the avoidance of Americanisms, or with having what is called a good prose style. On the other hand, it is not concerned with fake simplicity and the attempt to make written English colloquial, nor does it even imply in every case preferring the Saxon word to the Latin one, though it does imply using the fewest and shortest words that will cover one's meanings. What is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word, and not the other way about. In prose, the worst thing one can do with words is to surrender them. When you think of a concrete object, you think wordlessly, and then, if you want to describe the thing you have been visualizing, you probably hunt about till you find the exact words that seem to fit. When you think of something abstract, you are more inclined to use words from the start, and unless you make a conscious effort to prevent it, the existing dialect will come rushing in and do the job for you, at the expense of blurring or even changing your meaning. Probably, it is better to put off using words as long as possible, and get one's meaning as clear as one can through pictures or sensation. Afterwards, one can choose, not simply accept, the phrases that will best cover the meaning, and then switch around and decide what impressions one's words are likely to make on another person. This last effort of the mind cuts out all stale or mixed images. all prefabricated phrases, needless repetitions, and humbug and vagueness generally. But one can often be in doubt about the effect of a word or a phrase, and one needs rules that can rely on when instinct fails. I think the following rules will cover most cases. Rule 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Number 2. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Number 3. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Number 4. Never use the passive where you can use the active. Number 5. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Number 6. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything barbarous. These rules sound elementary, and so they are, but they demand a deep change of attitude in anyone who has grown used to writing in the style now fashionable. One could keep all of them and still write bad English, but one could not write the kind of stuff that I quoted in these 5 specimens at the beginning of this article. I have not here been considering the literary use of language, but merely language as an instrument for expressing, and not for concealing or preventing thought. Stuart Chase and others have come near to claiming that all abstract words are meaningless, and have used this as a pretext for advocating a kind of political quietism. Since you don't know what fascism is, how can you struggle against fascism? One not needs swallow such absurdities as this, but one ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language, and that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, even to yourself. Political language, and with variations this is true of all political parties, from conservatives to anarchists, is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. One cannot change this all in a moment, but one can at least change one's own habits, and from time to time one can even, if one jeers loudly enough, send some worn-out and useless phrase, some jackboot, Achilles heel, hotbed, melting pot, acid test, veritable inferno, or other lump of verbal refuse into the dustbin, where it belongs.